What if the most powerful medicines ever discovered were not developed in a pharmaceutical laboratory, were not patented by a corporation, and were not approved by a modern regulatory agency, but were instead recorded in the oldest book in human history, thousands of years before the invention of the microscope? And that is not a spiritual claim. Now, that is a scientific one. Over the past 3 decades, researchers at institutions including Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins University, the University of California, and the Regimen Institute of Science in Israel have published peer-reviewed studies examining the biological activity of substances mentioned directly in the pages of the Bible. What they found has stopped even the most skeptical scientists cold. Today, we walk through 10 drinks, 10 specific liquids referenced in Scripture, and examine what modern biochemistry, molecular biology, and clinical research now confirms about each one. We cover the exact Bible verses, the historical context in which these drinks were used, the specific peer-reviewed studies, and the precise molecular mechanisms that explain why they work. Stay with us to the very end. Because the 10th drink has been the subject of a clinical trial published in the New England Journal of Medicine, over 7,000 patients, nearly 5 years, and the results were so significant the trial was stopped early for ethical reasons. We will tell you everything. This is not religion. This is not alternative medicine. This is history, biology, and chemistry, and the story they tell together is more extraordinary than most people have ever been allowed to hear. Number 1. Living water. For my people have committed 2 evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 13. The Hebrew phrase Maim Chayim means living water, a technical term in the ancient Near East for water in motion. Springs, rivers, water emerging from the earth under its own pressure. It was explicitly distinguished from the dead water of cisterns, still, stored, stagnant. This was not poetry, it was epidemiological precision. In the ancient world, waterborne disease was among the leading causes of death across every major civilization. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery spread through contamination of standing water. The Mosaic Law mandated living water for purification rites involving skin disease, contact with the dead, and contaminated vessels, recorded in Leviticus chapter 14 and Numbers chapter 19, 3,000 years before germ theory. Modern research adds a second layer beyond pathogen avoidance. A study published in Water Research in 2017 by the Swiss Federal Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology demonstrated that natural spring water contains significantly higher concentrations of dissolved magnesium, calcium, potassium, bicarbonate, and silica compared to stored or treated water. Magnesium participates in over 325 enzymatic reactions. The enzyme ATP synthase, which produces adenosine triphosphate, the fuel molecule of every living cell, requires magnesium as a structural cofactor. A paper in the journal Nutrients in 2015 found magnesium deficiency in up to 70% of Americans, directly associated with cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and clinical depression. The silica content of spring water has drawn particular attention from neurologists. A 15-year prospective study in the American Journal of Epidemiology, following over 7,000 participants, found that higher dietary silicon intake through drinking water was independently associated with reduced risk of cognitive decline. The mechanism: silicon binds aluminum ions in the gut, preventing absorption. Aluminum accumulates in the brain tissue of Alzheimer's patients at concentrations far above those found in healthy tissue. The calcium bicarbonate content of hard spring water also supports bone mineral density through a mechanism separate from dietary calcium intake. A randomized controlled trial published in Osteoporosis International found that women consuming calcium bicarbonate-rich mineral water for 6 weeks showed measurable reductions in urinary bone resorption markers compared to those drinking low mineral water, in effect equivalent to a daily calcium supplement. Practical application. Natural mineral water with a total dissolved solids count above 150 milligrams per liter and a pH above 7, consumed at minimum 2 liters per day. The oldest prescription in the biblical dietary tradition remains among the most evidence-supported health recommendations available. Number 2. Fine wine that gladdens human hearts, oil to make their faces shine, and bread that sustains their hearts. Psalm 104, verse 15. No substance in the Bible appears more frequently in a health context than wine. But the most studied passage comes from 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 23, where Paul writes to a young leader suffering chronic illness, "Stop drinking only water and use a little wine because of your stomach and your frequent illnesses. A specific substance, a specific quantity, a specific condition." Written around the year 63 of the Common Era. In 2003, researchers at Harvard Medical School published findings in the journal Nature that transformed aging biology. Dr. David Sinclair identified resveratrol, a polyphenol found in red grape skin and red wine, as an activator of sirtuin-1, sometimes called the master regulator of the aging genome. Sirtuin-1 controls gene expression related to DNA repair, inflammation, and mitochondrial production. Resveratrol turns on the same genetic repair programs as caloric restriction without reducing food intake. A study in Nature in 2006 found resveratrol extended the lifespan of obese mice by 31%, improving cardiovascular function and insulin sensitivity to levels comparable to lean animals. A landmark study published in the journal Gut in 2019 by King's College London researchers examining over 900 individuals found that red wine, even consumed only occasionally, was the single dietary variable most strongly associated with greater gut microbiome diversity. Diversity of the gut microbiome is now considered among the strongest predictors of immune function, metabolic health, and longevity. The mechanism involves red wine polyphenols acting as selective prebiotics, feeding bifidobacterium and lactobacillus while suppressing pathogenic species. Practical application. The biblical prescription was precise: a little wine. Studies demonstrating benefit involve 4 to 8 ounces of red wine with food, favoring polyphenol-rich varieties such as Pinot Noir, Malbec, and Nebbiolo. If you do not consume alcohol, standardized resveratrol supplements of 100 to 500 milligrams daily replicate several of these mechanisms. Number 3. Pomegranate juice. I would give you spiced wine to drink, the juice of my pomegranates. Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verse 2. 72 pomegranates decorated the entrance pillars of Solomon's temple. They lined the hem of the high priest's robe. The fruit was among the 7 species God chose to define the Promised Land, not aesthetic choices. 3,000 years of empirical observation about which plants most powerfully sustained human life. A landmark clinical study published in Clinical Nutrition in 2004 by Dr. Michael Aviram and colleagues at the Technion, Israel Institute of Technology, followed patients with severe carotid artery stenosis for 3 years. Patients drinking 8 ounces of pomegranate juice daily showed a 30% reduction in carotid intima media thickness, a direct measurement of arterial plaque, while the control group showed a 9% increase. The difference between an artery healing and an artery deteriorating. The mechanism involves punicalations metabolized by gut bacteria into urolithins. A clinical trial published in Nature Metabolism in 2019 by researchers at École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne found that urolithin A activates mitophagy, the cellular process of clearing damaged mitochondria and replacing them with new ones. Participants showed significant improvements in muscle endurance and cellular energy efficiency. Mitochondrial dysfunction is now considered one of the primary drivers of biological aging. Pomegranate also contains ellagic acid, shown in studies published in cancer prevention research to suppress nuclear factor kappa B, the master inflammatory switch driving cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer. A clinical pilot study found that pomegranate juice extended PSA doubling time in prostate cancer patients from 15 months to 54 months, a 360% extension. A practical application: 8 ounces of pure pomegranate juice daily, unsweetened, not from concentrate. Processing and dilution significantly reduce the bioactive compound concentration that drives all of these effects. Number 4. Hyssop tea. Cleanse me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Psalm 51, verse 7. Hyssop, Hyssopus officinalis, appears in Scripture in a tight cluster of contexts: the Passover doorpost ritual in Exodus, the purification rites for those who touched the dead in Numbers, and the crucifixion in the Gospel of John. Every appearance shares one theme: cleansing in the presence of severe contamination. 3,000 years before Pasteur, people consistently reached for this specific plant when microbial threat was most dangerous. Modern chemistry explains why. Hyssop contains pinocamphone, isopinocamphone, thujone, camphene, and the flavonoid diosmin. Researchers at the University of Calabria, publishing in Molecules in 2019, demonstrated that hyssop essential oil showed broad-spectrum antimicrobial activity against Staphylococcus aureus, including methicillin-resistant strains, Escherichia coli, Candida albicans, and Pseudomonas aeruginosa. These represent some of the most dangerous treatment-resistant pathogens in modern hospital medicine. The mechanism is membrane disruption. Hyssop monoterpenes penetrate bacterial cell membranes directly, causing loss of cellular contents. Unlike conventional antibiotics targeting specific enzymes, this mechanism is far harder for bacteria to develop resistance against. A study in BMC Complementary Medicine and Therapies in 2021 found that hyssop water extracts demonstrated antiviral activity against herpes simplex virus type 1 and 2, with rosmarinic acid blocking viral attachment to host cell receptors. A meta-analysis in phlebology in 2016 confirmed that diosmin significantly reduced venous edema, pain, and varicose vein severity across 11 randomized controlled trials. The diosmin content of hyssop has also been clinically investigated for venous health. A meta-analysis in phlebology in 2016, reviewing 11 randomized controlled trials, found that diosmin significantly reduced leg edema, venous pain, and the progression of varicose veins, outcomes relevant to a large proportion of adults in midlife and beyond. Practical application: dried hyssop leaves steeped in water at 90 degrees Celsius for 10 to 12 minutes, consumed twice daily as immune and respiratory support. The flavor combines mint and sage with a slightly camphoraceous quality. Avoid concentrated preparations during pregnancy. Leper number 5. Vinegar, the drink of fields and soldiers. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." Ruth chapter 2, verse 14. Vinegar spans the biblical narrative across over 1,000 years, from Ruth's barley fields to the Nazirite vow in Numbers, to the sponge at the crucifixion. Roman legionaries carried it diluted in water because it resisted bacterial growth without refrigeration. Boaz, one of the wealthiest men in Bethlehem, singled out the sour liquid specifically, instructing Ruth to dip her bread before eating. She was eating roasted grain, a high glycemic starchy meal. A landmark study published in Diabetes Care in 2004 by Dr. Carol Johnston at Arizona State University found that consuming 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar immediately before a high-carbohydrate meal reduced postprandial blood glucose by 34% in type 2 diabetic subjects, 19% in pre-diabetic subjects, and 11% in healthy subjects. Acetic acid inhibits both salivary and pancreatic amylase, the enzymes that break starch into glucose, and intestinal sucrase, slowing carbohydrate absorption. Boaz instructed Ruth to pre-dip bread in acetic acid solution before eating starch. 3,000 years before Arizona State University documented exactly this mechanism. A follow-up study in the Journal of Functional Foods in 2018 found regular vinegar consumption improved insulin sensitivity through increased expression of GLUT4 transporters in skeletal muscle. A Japanese randomized controlled trial with 175 obese adults in bioscience, biotechnology, and biochemistry in 2009 found that daily vinegar consumption over 12 weeks reduced visceral fat area by 5%, waist circumference by 1.4 centimeters, and serum triglycerides by 26% compared to placebo. Practical application: 1 to 2 tablespoons of raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar. With the mother, which preserves the beneficial bacterial cultures, diluted in 8 ounces of water, consumed immediately before the largest carbohydrate-containing meal of the day. Always dilute. Undiluted acetic acid applied to tooth enamel daily causes erosion over time. Use a straw if preferred, and rinse with plain water afterward. End of Chapter 1. Welcome back. Now we move into the second half of our list. And this half contains some of the most astonishing convergences between ancient text and modern laboratory science we've encountered in researching this channel. Number 6. Milk, the first promise of the land come. All you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Isaiah chapter 55, verse 1. A land flowing with milk and honey. This phrase appears in the Hebrew scriptures over 20 times as the defining description of the Promised Land. God did not describe it in terms of gold or strategic geography. He described it in terms of 2 biological substances. This deserves more than a symbolic reading. The milk consumed in biblical Canaan was raw, whole milk from goats and sheep. A study in the Journal of Dairy Science in 2011 by researchers at the University of Granada found that raw goat milk contains substantially elevated concentrations of medium-chain triglycerides, caprylic acid, capric acid, and lauric acid, conjugated linoleic acid, and bioavailable minerals. Medium-chain triglycerides bypass the lymphatic system and travel directly to the liver, where they convert to ketone bodies. Fuels for the brain, heart, and muscle that requires no insulin signaling, critical for individuals with insulin resistance or early neurodegeneration. Caprylic acid demonstrated antifungal activity against Candida albicans and reduced interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha in a study published in Nutrients in 2019. Milk also contains lactoferrin, a glycoprotein that starves pathogenic bacteria of iron, their essential growth nutrient. A clinical trial in the Journal of Pediatrics found lactoferrin supplementation reduced confirmed neonatal sepsis in preterm infants by 66%. No practical application. High-quality whole-fat grass-fed dairy with higher conjugated linoleic acid and fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. The research does not support reduced fat dairy as a health equivalent. And at number 7. Honey in water. The drink that brightened Jonathan's eyes. Jonathan reached out the end of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it into the honeycomb. He raised his hand to its mouth, and his eyes brightened. 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 27. Read this with clinical attention. Jonathan and his men had been fighting without food for an entire day. They were hypoglycemic, exhausted, and the text records they were faint. Jonathan touched his raw honeycomb to his lips, and his eyes brightened. The Hebrew vat yor na einav means literally, his eyes became illuminated and alert. This is a clinical description of glucose delivery to a hypoglycemic brain. Raw honey contains approximately 40% fructose, 31% glucose, and a complex mixture of oligosaccharides, enzymes, and bioactive proteins. Glucose absorbs within 15 to 20 minutes, restoring blood sugar rapidly. Fructose and oligosaccharides follow more slowly, sustaining energy over hours. The oligosaccharides function as prebiotics in the colon, selectively feeding bifidobacterium populations. A randomized, double-blind trial published in the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine in 2007 by Penn State researchers found that buckwheat honey outperformed dextromethorphan, the active ingredient in most commercial cough suppressants, on every measured outcome, including cough frequency, severity, and sleep quality. The investigation into why revealed layered biology. Raw honey contains the antimicrobial peptide defensin 1, secreted by honeybees directly into honey. A study in the FASEB journal in 2010 by Amsterdam University Medical Centers identified defensin 1 as the primary antibacterial factor in raw honey and confirmed its activity against methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. The mechanism is membrane disruption, a mode of action to which bacterial resistance develops far more slowly than resistance to conventional antibiotics. Raw honey also generates hydrogen peroxide through glucose oxidase, creating a sustained low-level oxidative environment that selectively destroys pathogens while being well tolerated by human tissue. The same principle behind MediHoney, the FDA-approved clinical wound dressing. Methylglyoxal in Manuka honey has been the subject of over 250 peer-reviewed studies, with research in Frontiers in Microbiology in 2016 finding it disrupts bacterial biofilms more effectively than clinical concentration antibiotics against drug-resistant species. Heat above 40 degrees Celsius destroys glucose oxidase and denatures defensin 1, the entire difference between raw honey and heated commercial products. Practical application: 1 tablespoon of raw, unfiltered, single-origin honey dissolved in warm, not boiling, water, consumed in the morning or before sleep. Number 8. Bitter herbs infusion. Medicine in the Passover meal. That same night, they are to eat the meat roasted over fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Was Exodus chapter 12, verse 8. The Passover Seder meal is one of the most precisely specified ritual meals in recorded human history. The bitter herbs, called maror, were not symbolic suffering alone. They were functional medicine embedded in the most important meal of the Israelite year. The plants most likely used as maror, based on botanical surveys and rabbinic literature, include wild lettuce, chicory, endive, dandelion, and horseradish. These share a class of compounds called sesquiterpene lactones that bind to TAS2R receptors throughout the gastrointestinal tract. Most people do not realize that bitter taste receptors are not limited to the tongue. They are expressed throughout the entire GI tract, in the lungs, and in the heart. When activated, they trigger increased bile production, elevated pancreatic enzyme secretion, and improved gastric motility. A study in pharmaceutical biology in 2016 by the University of Bern demonstrated that sesquiterpene lactones extracts significantly increased bile flow rate. Adequate bile production is essential for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins A, E, and K, governing immune function, bone density, vision, and cardiovascular health. Chicory root contains inulin at 35 to 48% of dry weight, a potent prebiotic that significantly increased bifidobacterium abundance in the colon and reduced serum triglycerides in a randomized controlled trial in the British Journal of Nutrition in 2017. Dandelion root contains taraxacin and tarasaccharine, shown in evidence-based complementary and alternative medicine in 2011 to protect liver cells against acetaminophen-induced injury, with effectiveness comparable to the standard clinical antidote N-acetylcysteine. Practical application: dried chicory root, dandelion root, and endive steeped in water at 85 degrees Celsius for 12 minutes before the largest meal of the day. Number 9. Barley water, the grain of the common people. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. Ruth chapter 2, verse 14. Barley was the grain of the biblical working class, the grain Ruth gleaned that fed the 5,000 in the only miracle recorded in all 4 Gospels, where John specifically records the loaves were made of barley. And it was the grain that Hippocrates, writing around 400 before the Common Era, described in regimen in acute diseases as the most nourishing of all liquid preparations for the sick. Across the Mediterranean world, barley water was the foundational therapeutic beverage, not by superstition, but by centuries of clinical observation. Modern nutritional biochemistry identified the specific molecule responsible, beta-glucan. In 2005, the United States Food and Drug Administration authorized a qualified health claim for barley beta-glucan in reducing the risk of coronary heart disease, only the second food after oats to receive this designation. A systematic review and meta-analysis in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2016, examining 14 randomized controlled trials with 826 participants, found that barley beta-glucan significantly reduced total cholesterol by 11.1 milligrams per deciliter, LDL cholesterol by 9.1 milligrams per deciliter, and fasting blood glucose by 3.4 millimoles per liter. These are reductions comparable to modest pharmaceutical cholesterol intervention and first-line dietary glycemic control. The mechanism, beta-glucan, forms a viscous gel in the small intestine that traps bile acids, the cholesterol-derived molecules secreted by the liver for fat digestion. By preventing their reabsorption, the liver synthesizes new bile acids from circulating cholesterol, lowering serum LDL. This is exactly the mechanism of pharmaceutical bile acid sequestrant drugs, without their side effects or prescription cost. A study at the University of Toronto in 2012 found barley beta-glucan produced a 32% reduction in postprandial blood glucose area under the curve, outperforming oat beta-glucan and psyllium in the same trial. Practical application: simmer 1/2 cup of whole hull barley in 6 cups of water for 45 minutes. Strain and drink the liquid with lemon and raw honey. 1 to 2 cups daily. This is what Hippocrates prescribed. This is what fed Ruth. Number 10. Olive oil. The sacred tonic confirmed by 7,000 patients, the vats will overflow with new wine and olive oil. Joel chapter 2, verse 27. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Luke chapter 10, verse 34. Olive oil runs through the entire Bible as the defining substance of divine abundance and healing. The lampstand in the tabernacle burned pure olive oil day and night without ceasing. Kings were anointed with it. Priests used it in every major ceremonial offering. And when Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan, the first aid treatment described, oil and wine poured into wounds, was the precise emergency care protocol of the first-century Mediterranean world. The biochemistry of extra virgin olive oil has been more thoroughly investigated than almost any substance in nutritional science. The landmark trial is the pre-dimed study, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2013, which followed 7,447 adults at high cardiovascular risk across Spain for nearly 5 years. The trial was stopped early because benefits in the olive oil group were so clear it would be unethical to continue. Participants consuming at least 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil daily showed a 30% relative risk reduction in major cardiovascular events, heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death. The compound responsible was identified in 2005 by Dr. Gary Beauchamp at the Monell Chemical Senses Center in Philadelphia. Beauchamp noticed that fresh extra virgin olive oil produces a delayed burning sensation at the back of the throat, identical to the throat irritation of ibuprofen. His team isolated the compound and named it oleocanthal. It inhibits cyclooxygenase 1 and cyclooxygenase 2, the exact same enzymes targeted by ibuprofen and aspirin. A study in the Annals of Internal Medicine calculated that the oleocanthal in 50 milliliters of extra virgin olive oil equals approximately 10% of the standard adult ibuprofen dose in anti-inflammatory potency. Daily consumption represents sustained, low-level, side effect-free COX inhibition that no pharmaceutical product has replicated. A study in PLOS 1 in 2013 found that oleocanthal promotes clearance of beta-amyloid plaques from neuronal cells through stimulation of autophagy. The authors described the results as striking and called for urgent clinical investigation. The burning you feel at the back of your throat from high-quality olive oil? That is oleocanthal. That is the medicine the Good Samaritan poured into wounds on the road to Jericho. The ancient world called it sacred. Modern chemistry calls it a COX inhibitor. They are describing the same thing. Practical application: 2 to 4 tablespoons of cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil daily in dark glass with a harvest date from the current season. Polyphenol content degrades with light, heat, and time. The best biblical medicine on this list costs less per day than a cup of coffee. Before we close, something must be said directly. Nothing in this video replaces medical care. If you are managing a chronic condition, please work alongside qualified physicians. Your healthcare team deserves to know everything you are consuming and why. The studies referenced here are real, peer-reviewed, and cited accurately. But research findings are not prescriptions, and a documentary channel is not a doctor. Never discontinue prescribed medication based on information in a video. What Scripture offers is not a replacement for clinical medicine. It is a foundation. The ancient world could not identify COX2 enzymes or sequence the human genome, but they observed over generations which substances sustained life and embedded those observations in a text that has survived unchanged for 3,000 years. We are only now building the language to read what was already written. Leave a comment telling us which drink surprised you most. Subscribe if you want to go deeper. Our next video examines the 7 species of the Promised Land and why every single one has appeared in peer-reviewed oncology research within the past 10 years. Share this with someone you care about, not to convert them, because you want them to live well. We will see you next time. End of Chapter 2.